1886, 4 years after Longfellow died, his brother Samuel put together a collection of Longfellow's journals and letters that were interspersed with biographical narrative. It's called The Life of Longfellow. It's in 3 volumes, and it's worth checking out. It's the first major entry into what would become, over a century now, of biographies and explorations of Longfellow's life. And if you had been reading Longfellow since the 1830s, when he started publishing poetry, you would have thought, by 1882, when his final collection in the Harbor is published, you would have thought, well, I've now read all of Longfellow's poetry. And that was mostly true. But it turned out that there were some poems that Longfellow had written that hadn't been published yet. Partly because Longfellow himself didn't think they were appropriate to publish. Now, a lot of these poems, when we read them, we think, these are kind of jottings, maybe ideas for poems or kind of undeveloped poems. One of these poems, though, has become probably among the best known of Longfellow's poems, and it's called Mezzo. So Mezzo was written in 1842, actually. It bears the title Mezzo, Boppered on the Rhine, August 25th, 1842. And this is presented for the first time in 1886 in the first volume of The Life of Longfellow. And Samuel Longfellow says this about this section. He says, except letters, Mr. Longfellow wrote little while at Marienburg. In his notebook appear some hints of books taking place. He talks about the Belfry of Bruges poem, which may have been begun here. And then he says, otherwise, Longfellow wrote no verse at Marienburg except the following personal sonnet, which has never been printed. And we have Mezzo. I'm going to read it to you. Mezzo. Half of my life is gone, and I have let the years slip from me, and have not fulfilled the aspiration of my youth, to build some tower of song with lofty parapet, not indolence nor pleasure, nor the fret of restless passions that would not be stilled, but sorrow, and a care that almost killed, kept me from what I may accomplish yet. Though, halfway up the hill, I see the past, lying beneath me with its sounds and sights, a city in the twilight dim and vast, with smoking roofs, soft bells, and gleaming lights, and here above me on the autumnal blast, the cataract of death, far thundering from the heights. It's a little unclear why Longfellow didn't want this published, but I think there's a lot to be read into that word personal in the introduction to this poem by Samuel Longfellow. It is a personal sonnet, and it is spoken very much out of the heart of the writer. Now, Longfellow spoke from the heart a lot and wrote a lot of poems about negative feelings. We could look at Psalm of Life or The Light of Stars as really good examples of late 30s poems that Longfellow is kind of pouring out, like, I feel really frustrated about life, and maybe it's not even worth going on. But there was something about Mezzo that I think felt too raw and too personal for Longfellow, and so he didn't publish it with Belfry of Bruges in 1845, though it would have fit really well. Mezzo. We'll talk about the significance of that in a bit, but Mezzo is a line from Dante, or it's a phrase from Dante, and it would have fit really well with that Dante poem that we looked at last time. But he didn't publish it, and 1886 is the year that Mezzo kind of comes into the reading public. And Mezzo, I was doing some searching on YouTube earlier for, are there other videos about Mezzo, and there are a few, and it's funny, they're tied to preparing for the AP test channels, because apparently Mezzo at some point in the past was used as a text in an AP literature exam. So that's pretty cool. We have this poem that was written in 1842 that was suppressed for one reason or another, maybe even just forgot about by the poet, and then is finally published 4 years after his death, which goes on to be such an important poem in American history that, AP test takers are forced to read it and answer questions about it. Well, forced should not be the word. This is a lovely sonnet, and it is, I think, a favorite of Longfellow's poetic corpus for a reason. Let's talk a bit about the details and the allusions. So, Mezzo Cammin is an adaptation of the opening line of Dante's Divine Comedy. The opening line of Dante's Divine Comedy is something like Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita. So, mezzo and cammin, mezzo means middle, and cammin means way. If you think about cammin is related to like the Spanish word camino, the way or the path or the road. So, the middle of the road. Now, Dante very famously sets his poem, the Divine Comedy, in 1300, the year 1300, when he would have been 35 years old. And Longfellow writes this poem in 1842 when he would have been 35 years old. He was born in 1807. So Longfellow was feeling pretty Dantean when he wrote this. And there are other poems. There's a Don Patterson poem where he talks about being, "Oh son, I was mezzo del cammin, and the right way was lost to me." It's a really beautiful poem. We should talk about it sometime. But there's this sense that Longfellow is at the same place that Dante was when Dante became lost in the dark wood. Now, why would Longfellow feel that? Was it just he was 35 and thought, I guess, now's the time I'm supposed to feel lost or like there's something wrong in my life? Well, no. If you go back and look at our series of videos on Longfellow's life that we did a few years ago now, there's a video called Romantic Drama in Longfellow's Life. And that goes into the really difficult situation Longfellow was in, basically in the early 1840s. In 1842, Longfellow was in Marienburg for a reason. This is in Germany. He had gone to Germany as sort of he was taking a leave of absence from Harvard University where he was teaching because he was, I think he was clinically depressed is probably what we'd call it now, but he was just in poor mental and physical health. Now, why was he in poor mental and physical health? Well, his wife had died a couple of years earlier, Mary. She had died on a European trip that she had gone on with Longfellow. And Longfellow actually, he had to send her body home from Europe to her family in America. It's very, very sad. Once again, we've done whole videos on it. So this is a couple of years after that. Longfellow is back in Europe trying to kind of recover his equilibrium. He participated in something called a water cure in Germany, where you would bathe in these mineral springs and stand under waterfalls, and it was supposed to cure you. Longfellow wasn't just suffering from grief, though. Longfellow had kind of rebounded and fallen in love with another girl, Frances Appleton, and she had kind of spurned his advances. And so he's both still dealing with the grief of the death of his first wife, but also this recent disappointment. And so when he says, "Half my life is gone, and I have let the years slip from me," he's thinking of, he's buried a wife, he's tried at love again, and it didn't work. And I think that's where we get this idea of sadness keeping you from what you could accomplish. So he says, "I have not fulfilled this aspiration of my youth, to build some tower of song with lofty parapet." I wanted, since a boy, to build this tower of song, to write this great thing. We have these letters that Longfellow wrote to his father when he was in college. "Dad, I'm going to be a writer." And his dad's like, "Yeah, how are you going to make money?" So he has this kind of youthful ambition, which he ends up making money being a professor. And it gives him enough time to, start a career as a writer as well. But he says, even though, from the outside appearance, he's a Harvard professor of modern languages, that's pretty prestigious, even back then. He says, "I haven't yet fulfilled my aspiration." He says, "It's not indolence, not pleasure, nor the fret of restless passions that would not be still. I haven't been wasting my life. I haven't been partying it up." He says, "But sorrow and a care that almost killed kept me from what I may accomplish yet. So there's this idea that no, it really is his grief, which he's still dealing with. And if you had been reading Longfellow's poetry from 1839 to 1842, you'd be like, yeah, you've been writing some pretty depressing poems, dude, for the last few years. That's the octave. The from half of my life to kept me from what I may accomplish yet. If we were to look at the rhyme scheme, we would see it's an ABBA, the good Petrarchan rhyme scheme, which makes sense. It's Italian, it's connecting to the Dantean. Dante has rhyme schemes that are kind of like that in his poetry. The sestet is interesting, and I think ambiguous. Though halfway up the hill, we have that halfway word again there. Though halfway up the hill, I see the past, this is capital P, past, lying beneath me with its sounds and sights, a city in the twilight dim and vast, with smoking roofs, soft bells, and gleaming lights. So we have this, the past is like a city. And he describes, hiking up these mountains and literally looking from halfway up a hill down at cities below him. He has this in his journals of this time. In fact, he loved hiking in Germany and writes a lot about it in multiple journals and books. So this is a real experience he's had, but he's now allegorizing it with saying, this is like looking at my past. And then there is the future that he looks to. He says, I hear above me on the autumnal blast, the cataract of death, capital D, death, far thundering from the heights. It's interesting. We had death, capital D, as a potential character in the Elizabeth Barrett Browning sonnet. When who holds thee now? Death, I said. And the silver answer rang, not death, but love. That's a pretty positive ending there. Here it's, no, I know death is waiting for me. It's the other half of my life is going toward death. So is he going to fulfill the aspiration of his youth? Is he going to build that Tower of Song with lofty parapet? He doesn't really give an answer to it. But there's a sense, and sonnets do this so well, of giving you a meditation that's balanced and in tension between hopes and fears, between possibilities and actualities. He gives us a moment in time of like, this is 35 for me, sitting here in Germany. I lost my first wife, tried to love again, she spurned me. I could still be a great writer, but sorrow has kept me from it, and death is coming. It's a wonderful picture. And it's one of the things that Longfellow was so good at, giving us these portraits of an emotional moment in time. Now, go watch our Longfellow videos from a couple of years ago, and you'll learn that Longfellow came back to America, ended up rekindling his relationship with Frances, who had spurned him, ended up marrying her and having lots of kids and being very happy until later in life she passes away before him in a fire. It's very sad. But he does also, publish Belfry of Bruges, Evangeline, Song of Hiawatha, Paul Revere's Ride, a translation of the Divine Comedy. He goes on to do a lot of great things. He does, I would argue, build that Tower of Song with lofty parapet. So this secret sonnet, this sonnet that he wrote, but that no one got to see until after his death, which gives us a picture of a poet really on the cusp of triumph, but he doesn't know it. It's an important moment in American history. And it's cool that we have someone like Samuel Longfellow who came along and preserved these poems that would have been lost to history if we didn't have them published in the life of Longfellow. There's another sonnet or two that's like this that we'll talk about in future videos. Thanks a lot.